Keith ain't got all night.
Keep running your mouth. Go on ahead. Yeah.
All right, so we right back at you one more, one more again with my brothers in Brotherly Love, the podcast, and we're very excited about it. I know we're excited. We're excited about every show that we do, but certain shows get me, they make me feel all springy inside, and this is one of those shows because we have some great talent with us tonight. We have the indomitable Keith Alexander. Keith Alexander is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the Washington Post. He was recently honored for serving more than 25 years with the Post, and he's got honors upon honors upon honors. So we're very excited to have him here. My name is Jay Wendell Gordon. I'm the Warrior Lawyer. I got my brothers with me. I'm from the DMV, as you can see. I'm from Morgan State University, HBCU dad, grad, and all the folks like my 8-track tapes, and got my brothers with me. But before I do that, we also have attorney Latoya Francis Williams. Now, many of you all may have heard of Latoya, maybe you haven't, but now get to know her because she's making waves in the area of civil rights, police misconduct, criminal defense, you name it, she's been doing it. And quite frankly, I take some pride in her presence because I was her mentor when she was in law school. She actually came and worked in my office, and she just makes me so proud with all the success that she's attained over the years. But before we get to Keith and Latoya, we're going to hear from Jason or Jeff in that order or whatever order they so choose.
All right, well, I'll go next. We go out of order, so I guess I'll go. So anyway, how you doing? This is Jeff Gordon here coming at you from the boat. We outside once again, man. It's nice out here. Hope y'all had a chance to enjoy this day. We are right back at you once again. My name is Jeff Gordon. I'm an HBCU grad. I'm a father. I'm a son, graduate of the Hampton Institute University. Or the
Hampton. Look at that. Poor little tink tink.
The standard of excellence. And so we got an exciting show for you guys, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jason.
What's going on, folks? It's Jason S., the voice Gordon, the baby of the bunch. I am an HBCU grad. I am a graduate of the best HBCU on this show right now because we're in the top 2 and we're not number 2. Home of your MVP, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris. None other than the Mecca, Howard University, HU.
Oh.
All right. We got a bison on here.
Oh,
I am a HBCU grad. I'm a husband. I am a uncle. I am a father. I'm a dada. And I'm also a brother to these two gentlemen here. And we're looking forward to a great show tonight on In Brotherly Love. Let's get it started, Jay.
All right, so look, we got Keith Alexander and attorney Latoya Francis Williams. We're going to start with Keith Alexander. I've known him for a long time. We used to attend the same church down in Fort Washington, Maryland, Ebenezer AME Church. And but this guy is a phenomenal journalist. I don't know if I should call him a writer or a journalist. He's been covering the courts for many, many years, I don't know if he covered one of my cases. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't even remember, but he's been doing it for a long time. So without any further ado, I'm gonna let him tell you a little bit more about himself, and y'all get to know Keith Alexander. And then from there, we're gonna talk to Latoya Francis Williams.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I mean, you introduced me. There's nothing left for me to say. I'm a bison as well. You kind of left that part
Notice
out.
I left that part out.
HU. The poor brother who's from the HIU. I don't know what that is. It seems like a split personality. Is the HI, is the HIU, is the HU? I don't know what that is, but
we're a little tink.
Oh my gosh. Is this where we going with this? Y'all sure y'all want to ride this ride?
You're not big enough for this ride, sir.
You're not big enough for this ride, sir.
Oh, brother, you have no idea. I'm coming with fully loaded with the watch. And so it is an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to a very lively discussion. Thank you for having me.
All right. And Latoya Francis Williams, you tell him what's up. You tell me, she's the queen amongst she's a rose amongst all these thorns. So
well, I must say thank you, and good evening. I am truly blessed to be a part of this conversation. I know it's a serious and very sincere topic, dear to my heart and dear to all of our hearts. So while I too hail from HBCUs, I am ecstatic to be able to talk about what I do all day, every day. That's addressing police misconduct, government overreach, and shedding light on what we know really hurts our community. So I thank you all. I hope not to offend too many, but if I do, I'm just speaking truth. That's right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us this evening. Keith, y'all put together a fantastic article. Ladies and gentlemen, if you all have not read this article in the Washington Post, it came out March 9th. And incidentally, I believe that was a Wednesday it was a Wednesday. And this was the day that I started a jury trial. So I got it late, but when I read it, I immediately called you, Keith, because I was like, man, I really would like to have you on the show just to talk about what you wrote about. Keith, again, is a journalist for the Washington Post, and he wrote an article in the Post that came out Wednesday that's called The Hidden Billion-Dollar Cost of Repeated Police Misconduct.
Right.
The hidden billion-dollar cost of police misconduct, of repeated police misconduct. So that was the clickbait enough for me. That's what made me read. And so when I started reading, I started thinking, damn, in the last 10 years, it's been upwards of $3 billion in payouts just for police misconduct. And the reason why I brought Latoya here is because, like myself, Latoya does police misconduct work as well. So I wanted her to be involved in this conversation. But I want to start with you, Keith. What inspired you, or who came up with this idea to even catalog all this detailed information about the payouts from some 40,000 cases across the nation over the last 10 years? Who did it? How did you do it?
Right. Well, this was, first of all, we looked at 25 cities. It's not, with 25 cities, the departments across the country. We didn't go, all the departments, obviously. We just focused on the largest 25 departments. My colleague, Stephen Rich, he's a database editor. He approached one of the editors and investigator, Dave Fallis, with an idea to do a story looking at the most expensive police officer out there. Those officers who have so many lawsuits out there that he or she would be the most expensive officer. And that was the original plan. But it turned out that was not doable for a variety of reasons. Once we got into the data, once we got into the court records, trying to find the most expensive officer was not going to actually work. But what we did figure out what we can do was what we have right there in front of you. What we figured out was we can go through the data and pull out the officers who are repeatedly costing cities thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because they're basically being sued for the same thing over and over again. And so that's what we decided to do. We thought this would be a very easy task. Well, there's a reason why it took a year to pull off, because the cities and departments really don't keep this information. We had to go into lawsuits. We had to go into the federal court, into the files, and pull out the names of the officers, because a lot of the departments or the cities do not keep that information by the name of the officer. So it was a lot of digging. Like you said, 40,000 cases, all 25 departments nationwide, going into the settlements and finding that these officers were repeatedly the subject of settlements, but the officers' names are not associated. It's just the dollar figure and the plaintiff. And then we had to use the plaintiff's name to go into the court records and pull out the names of the officers. So it was a lot of work. There's a reason why this has not been done before. I just explained to you why, but it's also very telling that you have officers who are sued 12, 13, 14 times for the same type of violation, excessive force or wrongful arrest or illegal search and seizure. Well, one would think after a few times that officer might be the subject of retraining, might be reassigned to another beat or something of that nature. Why are taxpayers basically paying over and over again for this officer who may or may not have done something that they were not supposed to do. And I say may or may not because, as you know, they're allegations. And so these are mostly are settlements. So there has not been a finding of fact as to whether or not these officers did in fact do the things that people have sued them for.
But where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think what your article does is generate a hell of a lot of smoke. So much smoke that you can't even see. But we know that there's ambers are percolating, ambers are being stoked underneath. And we know where the fire is because as I read your article, it was so detailed that you went all the way down to the officers' names, these repeat offenders. And Latoya and I had conversations about tracking repeat offenders. In fact, Latoya has come up with a lot of great ideas dealing with police reform, and I can't even begin to name. It's just so many, because this is an issue that's very near and dear to her. But when I saw some of the names of the officers, I was like, damn, I sued him. Damn, I sued him too. Like shit, these officers' names are recurring themes in these types of cases. And in any other job in America, if you have cost taxpayers, your city, dollars to the tune of 6 figures, 7 figures, you wouldn't have a job. But these officers find a way to stay employed as law enforcement officers. Nobody challenges them. Nobody challenges their law enforcement certificates that allows them to be permitted to be law enforcement officers in the state of Maryland. And your article really shines a light on these bad apples. Latoya,
I mean, I personally know that if these officers were teachers, and they cause even 4 figures in damage, they would not have their jobs.
Yeah, it's not just, it's not just Maryland. We saw in Seattle, Chicago, and Detroit. When I talk to police officers, like the unions, and one of the things that they said, remember that these are allegations,
right? And
falling back on, you can't punish someone for an allegation, even though it's a repeated allegation. These are just allegations. And because they're only allegations, the unions are basically saying you should not be penalizing these officers when there has not been a finding of fact. And so
let me chime in on that. That is
as to the reason why these officers are still in these positions, because there has not been a finding of fact.
And to that I say bullshit, because let me tell you something. The way most departments work,
bring them guns,
most departments work is when there's a complaint filed against an officer, there's almost automatically a triggered internal investigation. So this case or the cases usually take more than one path. Every department has a hierarchy. So if there's an internal affairs, there's an investigation. If a complainant, however, is also saddled with criminal charges, police departments bank on the fact that you don't have the bravery or the capability to speak up because you're also facing criminal charges. So while you have the right to remain silent, you also at the same time aren't going to talk about how you got your ass kicked by this officer that's serving as the state's main witness in your criminal case against you, even when the charges are trumped up. However, even when there's a complaint filed internally, internal affairs will go up and down that ladder. There may be a recommendation of termination or discipline, but the chief of police in most departments has the last word. So if you dig and you dig deep enough, you'll find there may have been a recommendation of reprimand against the officer, but if that is overridden, I can give you many examples in Baltimore City, for example. When Rodney Hill was the head of internal affairs in Baltimore City, when he made recommendations to let a lot of these officers go, that recommendation was overridden by the chief of police. So that allows that these officers to stay on the street. Let me give you a quick recent example. You all heard about Sergeant Middleton, who was at the time attending we call it a bachelorette party on Baltimore Street. That's in Baltimore, Maryland, in the city. They call it the red light district. She was at a party with a bunch of other officer friends, doing nothing, bothering no one. Sergeant Middleton was attacked by Officer Cushaw. Okay, Officer Cushaw didn't realize that this woman was in fact a police officer. Beat her down so bad, caught on video, everyone was outraged. Let me tell you what Baltimore City Police Department did to him. Nothing. They not only didn't charge him internally for assaulting Middleton, but injured her so bad. Now, we currently have a civil suit pending right now in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Maryland, but I'm going to show you how the police department gets around the issue. Not only did they not charge Kushaw internally with assaulting Sergeant Middleton, they went down the extra length to say this: if and only if he's convicted at trial, which he was, by the way, and as of 2.5 weeks ago, his conviction was sustained by the Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state of Maryland. But if and only if he was convicted, we will internally charge him with sustaining a conviction. So internally, they don't even investigate the assault. They don't even investigate the misconduct in office. They don't even decide to investigate or go forward against him for doing the damage that he just did to the department, this citizen, this fellow sworn member. Don't even get me started on how Black female officers are treated differently than Black male officers. But nevertheless, the department decided to circle the wagon, let this man stay on the street all this time, despite his conviction, because his conviction was on appeal, and never went after him for his actual conduct, only getting a conviction. So the department sustain what they call, or the departments maintain this cloak of armor around their officers, because they know that when the officers are seen to be bad behaviors, that is shining a light on the department itself. So they're going to continue to do what they do until we have these types of platforms, until we call them to the carpet. The way that Kushaw, and I have to say his name, Marlon Kushaw, behaved, it's on video. The way he beat down Sergeant Middleton because he did not know she was a police officer, as if it would make a difference, is absurd. The men that were on the block and at the clubs came out and said, hey, you can't do this to this woman. And it was only when he realized someone else said, you know, she's a cop and she works in internal affairs, did he start making up a story about how she didn't listen to him. She didn't actually listen to his commands. Just a bunch of bullshit. So my point is this. This article is sorely needed, but we have really got to dig into these departments on how they circle the wagon and pretend that their officers are only subjected to accusations. They know what misconduct looks like. They know the only use of force is excessive force. They know when an officer has committed a criminal activity. These same officers testify against civilians in trial for less. So when we let them off the hook by saying these are mere accusations, the reality is their standard is higher. We're not just about whether you committed a crime as a sworn member of the department. This is about whether you are even given the impression of misconduct in office. So I say all that to say this: we cannot let these departments off the hook. And quite candidly, especially in this case, this particular case with Kushaw and Middleton, everyone up to the chief of police needs to be held accountable, because when they found out that Sergeant Middleton was a sergeant in their own department, all they did was circle the wagons, had this woman handcuffed and chained to the wall of Central District for 11 friggin' hours. 11 hours. No citizen should have been subjected to that. So I say that to say, you know, I have much more to add on to this conversation, but these officers know that they do the community a disservice, but the departments know that if they put their officers out there and they actually tell the truth, it is actually peeling back the curtains on the department itself.
Man, you are bringing that fire, boy. I'm glad we got you on for Women's History Month, boy. Come on, bring that stank on you.
This is American History Month, as far as we concerned. But here's the thing: police misconduct is.
I can respond to
something that. Go ahead, Keith.
One, I don't know about Maryland, but in the cases that I looked at, many of the people who filed lawsuits did not file complaints with the department. All they did file lawsuits. So what the problem is that you have the city that's investigating these cases not talking or giving information to the police department. And that's been a lot of the miscommunication. Now, yes, if they filed a complaint with the department, then the department should have the information. But the people who I spoke to did not file complaints.
But even
why would they not file a complaint? Why would they not?
I can speak to that. I can speak to that because as an attorney, you don't want too many statements from your client being out there in the universe. So a lot of times an attorney might advise the client not to necessarily go through with the internal affairs, or maybe delay it, because I think it remains open for a year or so. Maybe delay it until, you know, you can try to resolve some of your issues, but you don't want to be locked into any statements that will come back and hurt you. So a lot of times, yeah, it does go underreported. And police misconduct in general goes underreported because once you've been abused by the police, they charge you with, I call it trifecta. They charge you with disorderly conduct, failure to obey, and
Assault on a police officer.
Resisting arrest. Those are the main three things. And whenever you see them, whenever my clients come in and they've been charged with assault on the officer, disorderly conduct, failure to obey, and resisting arrest, I should say 4 things, I know that they got their asses whipped. I said, You got your ass whipped, didn't you? They're like, yeah, we did. Yeah, I did.
And that was also
because, and that's only because of the charge. We know by the charge that they've been beaten. Isn't that right, Latoya?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, people know that when you have to tangle with the police department, you're going to be subjected to more abuse on top of abuse. But yes, Mr. Gordon, you're correct. You don't want your client, quote, giving statements. And most departments have an administrative closeout. So for example, if they've investigated and it's up to a year and the quote victim is not cooperating, they'll just close out the matter administratively. But they know that where the officer is also involved in the quote criminal case, that you can't say anything. You can't give any statements for fear that it would affect your ability to properly defend your case in a criminal court, juvenile, or whatever jurisdiction you may be in.
So in Baltimore, they engage in witness intimidation.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
That's another reason. They will actually drive by people's house slowly, park their car across the street from their house after they kicked your ass like last week. Parked in front of your house.
Absolutely.
I mean, they do some really dirty stuff. And I don't know if that really speaks to your issue, Keith, because there is the payouts.
That's not what this story was about.
Right.
Getting back to the story was about these lawsuits. One of the challenges for me was getting these people to talk to me. You remember, a lot of these people, their cases never made the courts. I mean, never made the media. And they got paid, and they want the case to go away. So the challenge was, even though I found the cases, was getting these people who filed the lawsuits to go on record and talk to me. And a lot of them say, "Look, I still live in this town with these, and I don't want to put a target on my back." So those people who you saw in that article, I went through dozens of people trying to get them to talk to me, and it was very telling to listen to them tell me, I would really like to talk to you. I really like to tell my story. And I know my story is out there in court documents, but if I put my name and face in the Washington Post against this officer, I'm going to dig this thing all up again and stir it all up again.
I can speak to that.
Very telling. And to hear these people, literally, one guy, his voice was cracking. You could hear the fear in his voice talking to me, like, I can't talk to you about this because I don't know what these officers are going to do to me. Even though I've already got paid, even though the case is over, if I pull off that scab in the Washington Post, I don't know what's going to happen. It was very interesting to hear them say that.
Now, I can speak to some of that. Like prior to a couple of years ago, at least in Baltimore City, I think in other jurisdictions, they used to have non-disclosure clauses in their settlement agreements. And it wasn't until one of those non-disclosure clauses were challenged by some lawyers that people were sworn to secrecy. They didn't know that they had the right to talk about their experience. And because of this agreement, that silenced a lot of those. So since you went 10 years back, you probably got a hold of some of those folks, because Latoya, when did they do away with the non-disclosure agreements? Maybe
about 2 years ago. Well, as to Maryland, about 2 years ago, it was acknowledged that the non-disclosures were unconstitutional. It's always been unconstitutional. And my position was, it was mighty fine of law enforcement in Maryland to acknowledge that what they were doing was unconstitutional. We thank them for that.
Can I ask a quick question about that Sergeant Milton case? Did the Baltimore Sun cover this, or did any media outlets cover this?
The Baltimore Sun covered it, 45 covered it. I believe Essence Online also covered it. So yes. And listen, please do follow. We're still moving along. We're in the early stages of litigation. The video's all over the place. I don't want to embarrass my client, but it's already out there in the public. If you see the way Marlon Cushaw battered and beat her, it dragged her by her hair, as if it was okay. And in his criminal trial, he had a bench trial in front of Judge Stuart Mays. And he testified that he thought my client was a lady of the night. And that's why he did what he did.
So we've got a comment. We've got a comment in our chat. in the chat says, when a civilian wins a case, and I'm a slash that and say settlement, is there a way that we can get the officers to pay the state back?
Now, we've been advocating for legislation to at least make them pay a deductible or something. Like they should have some skin in the game that would help them monitor their own conduct on the streets. We've been pushing legislation for that, pushing legislation for keeping a registry actually of officers of bad actors. And I think Keith, maybe you can talk about that a little bit. But Latoya, I think that was your idea, and I was pushing it with the legislators that I
don't know if immediately after our story came out, Senator Kane from Virginia, they put out a press release saying that this is exactly what they are trying to do with a bill. They proposed a bill as part of the whole police restructuring bill, that they want to do this exact very thing, where they can have a database nationwide that was required to keep names of officers and make it public if they are accused multiple times of various violations. And so there is a bill out there that probably won't pass the Senate. And that's the problem, is just trying to get this bill through the Senate. So they have tried. There is a piece of legislation that is actually out there.
I'll speak to kind of the 2 points. One, we've been pushing for a little while to have a bit of an insurance policy type of relationship with the different sworn members of the department. But the problem is a lot of officers will be uninsurable. They're so damn bad, right? But I've had a case where we kind of came up with a creative way to truly punish the officer. And departments can operate any way that they see fit. The relationship between the Fraternal Order of Police and the various departments can also require an officer to pay a portion of a settlement agreement or pay back a portion of a settlement agreement. Most local government tort claims act require the local government to indemnify and defend the officer itself. So yes, the money comes out of the taxpayers' coffers and the taxpayers' pockets. However, a department can require an officer to pay them back. There's nothing stopping that. And the fact that we don't see that more often again is a telltale sign that the departments are more concerned with circling the wagon than actually punishing the bad behavior. And it's possibly because they refuse to correct the bad behavior. So this can be as a unique a relationship as the respective departments want it to be. We've actually done that in one of our cases about 6 years ago.
Man, that's a great idea. Now, Keith, we've come up with the fact that it's what, 3.2, 3.5 billion that's been paid out nationwide over the last 10 years. When this article hit the press, was there any callback? What was the response from Congress, members in Congress? I mean, what was the response to it?
Well, that's what. First of all, we really expected to hear from police officers and individuals who were upset, but we didn't. It shows how balanced the story was, and I'm most proud of that. I'm most proud of the fact that we didn't hear from police officers who thought it was unfair. We didn't hear from attorneys who thought it was unfair or whatever. Police officers are actually quoted in the article. They said, "Look, we don't like the fact that these are always being settled. We want to go to court. We want to clear our name. We want to show that these allegations are unfair." I have
Those officers are delusional.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
you always have these narcissistic officers, and they really need to be checked out mentally, because these lawyers are looking at things objectively. They're not they're looking at it from a bird's eye point of view, evaluating all the evidence and not just taking wholesale what these officers are saying and then deciding, you know what, we face greater exposure if we take this to trial than we would if we settled it. So these officers who claim that they've lost something because these lawyers decided not to take their case to trial are delusional, and they need to thank their lucky stars that they didn't get on the stand and have to make a fool of themselves, because a lot of them are straight fools.
There's also other aspects, as you all well know. If these cases go to court, then you'll have a litany of litigation. You'll have court records involving this officer that prosecutors would have to turn over to defense attorneys. And if these officers had to testify in a criminal case, that information would come out as part of Brady. So there's another reason why the cities really don't want these cases to go to trial because they don't want a laundry list of their officers who are going to testify in criminal cases about their background that could actually impeach them when they get on the stand. And another reason is that they don't want the city to be held liable for employing an officer who has been found guilty time and time and time again.
Right.
So there's multiple reasons why the city doesn't want these cases to go to trial, and even the police department doesn't want these cases to go to trial.
And every reason is unacceptable, because what you're doing is you're releasing these very violent repeat offenders back on the streets and to harm our citizens once again. So that's one of the things that I appreciate, because that article is going to be there forever. And you can research just by looking at that article actually is a research tool. You can actually look up officers' names and find out what they've been involved in.
We had to contact every officer in those charts by phone, email them, either see if they had a response or no comment, or call their attorney, because we didn't want any of these officers, their names to appear in these articles and they not have a chance to respond. So that's another why this article took so long, because 25 cities times 3, and you do the math, that's how many officers we had to reach out to over and over again.
So Mr. Alexander, Mr. Alexander, and looking at this chart in your article, one thing that kind of struck me is that you have one officer who has 143 payments. One officer with 143 payments.
Which state? That was New York, I believe, or
no? I'm looking. It's the chart. So you have this chart. I could, if you like, I can try to share the chart. But like, you have 7,643 officers that have made at least 2 payments.
Correct.
You have 3,522 officers that made 3+ payments.
Right.
239 that made 10+. 25 have made 20+. 8 officers have made 46+ payments. 7 officers made 73+ payments. 5 officers made 101+ payments. 3 officers made 117+. And you have one officer, one officer has made 143 payments for misconduct.
Yeah, I think that officer's in New York. Yeah, it was.
Man, if you see them, point them out, man. Jesus.
And if you
these
see
are domestic terrorists.
And if you see his colleagues, point them out too. And if you see his superior, point them out too. Because you can't act like this with impunity all by yourself. You are emboldened and you are given the carte blanche, whatever you want to do. So the officer is not acting alone.
Yeah.
The officer is not acting alone.
Do you guys know if all of these payments are taxable? Like, once they make these payments, are they considered taxable income to the people and they get taxed again on it, like a double jeopardy?
No.
Personal injury payments are not taxable income.
It's compensation. It's to bring you back to zero. It's
Okay.
to make you whole.
Which, as we know in our practice, is not real, because not only do you have the physical scars, you have the mental scars, you're traumatized, you can't get back to school, you can't relate to your family, you can't deal with society, you really haven't been compensated. And that's not even talking about the medical bills. No hospital is forgiving bills from my clients that have been shot and maimed and or even killed. So, so you're certainly not made whole, but no, that's not taxable.
I do need to run. It has been a pleasure. I'm out of the office today. I'm running around, but it has been a pleasure. I wish I could stay longer. I've enjoyed this discussion, and I'm very grateful that you all had me be a part of this discussion. Thank you very much for having me.
He promised us 30 minutes, and he gave us 30 minutes. He's on vacation in heaven, in paradise. So we're not going to disturb that much longer. And that's why we brought Latoya on to kind of finish this conversation about this brilliant article that Keith Alexander, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist for the Washington Post, wrote with his colleagues on March 9th, and it was published on March 9th of 2022. Thank you, Keith. You've been a great friend, and I appreciate everything that you've done to make this show a success tonight. Thank you very much for having me.
All the best to you, man. All right, take care, everybody.
So Latoya, you heard it. We know it's a problem. It's been a problem. $3.5 billion, $3.2 billion payouts. That's ridiculous. Taxpayers. That's you and me.
And you know what we're not even speaking to is those are just payouts. See, that's not even the money these cities pay their attorneys to defend these cases.
Woo, you right about that.
So that's not the money they pay their experts to opine that the officer didn't do anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So the payout pales in comparison most of the time to how much the city pays in defending the actions themselves.
That's right.
So
we're talking about $1 billion industry.
A lot of money.
$1 billion industry to keep bad officers in place so they can continue to victimize our citizens and violate their constitutional rights. That's why this story was important to me. That's why it was important to bring it to light. And you know, stories like yours that with Sergeant Middleton, I mean, that's horrible. But she's just one in a number of female officers in Baltimore City who've been going through hell just to be able to serve their communities, to protect their communities. They're protecting and serving us, and they need protection and service, and it's unfortunate.
And if she gets mistreated the way that she was mistreated, and she's a police officer, what happens to us regular citizens?
Mm-hmm. And that therein lies the problem. Payouts, police misconduct. What do we need to do as lawyers who engage in this practice to try to correct some of these wrongs? What more can we do to ensure that we're making progress in righting the wrongs that occur within these departments?
You know, I think as lawyers, we have to be brave enough to speak publicly about the life cycle of a case like this, or these, I should say, not just Sergeant Middleton's matter. We need to be brave enough to stand up during election time to address our elected officials and what they are or not doing to service and save our communities. We need to be brave enough to even confront the officers in question and everyone up the chain when it comes to the hierarchy. Because the truth is this, you know, a lot of our clients could be us. Mm-hmm. A lot of our clients could be our brothers and sisters. They are. They are. I have my own personal family members that have been abused by police, killed by police, and you know, it's gone unchecked. And the reality is, in Jamaica, there's a saying, gunshot don't say excuse, meaning no different than, you know, crime doesn't say excuse me when it hits you. When the police come and when government has government overreach, they don't say, excuse me, they don't care about your color, your gender, your socioeconomic status. They don't care. And the reality is a lot of these people and persons, they're high on power. And so if you don't have the fortitude and you don't have the bravery to speak up, this will simply continue. You know, one of the things, and I'll keep it short, but one of the things,
do your thing.
You know, one of the things I shame other lawyers about is their decision not to speak up, their decision to literally smile and really show professional courtesy to the other side. Now, I don't mean be disrespectful. I mean, we're not the same. See, I represent victims, right? And I represent victims of homicide and victims of violent crimes when it comes to dealing with the police. Attorneys that represent the police departments and the unions and the officers, we're not saying they're not good people, but please do not confuse your position for my position. I am looking for justice and fairness and equity.
They kind of think they wear the white coats. And
I don't think they wear the white coats.
I look down on them, you know what I mean? I'm like, look.
I mean, that's the reality. I've had officers in deposition call me girly, bitch, missy, everything other than my name. And their attorneys will sit back as if they're the victim, as if my bringing or our firm bringing lawsuits is offensive to this process. When in reality, what I'm trying to do is show what victim-informed practice looks like. What we're trying to do is we're trying to expose these officers so we can change them and change the system. A lot of these officers are traumatized too. A lot of these officers are abusers for a reason, not a good reason, but for a reason. And if we don't bring this to light in civil suits and in administrative proceedings and in criminal actions, they simply skate on by and treat the next victim just as they did the last. So when we bring these lawsuits, we are not the same. We are not the same, and we shouldn't walk about as if we are the same. Quite candidly, we should be applauded for what we do because it takes bravery. I've had an
right, and not too many people do what we do. You're right. You're right.
No, and we should be proud and we should be boastful because we do this for the benefit of our community. We do this to change these police departments literally one officer at a time. So what can we do different? Be loud and be proud about it. What can we do different? Speak out, call these officers out by name. Officer Dwayne Williams, former officer Dwayne Williams from Baltimore City Police Department that beat down and beat up Shamel Maxwell, who was a minor, a 14-year-old at the time, chained him to the gurney of a hospital bed because he refused to take his medications and beat him up and had audacity to come to trial and say, I didn't beat him up that bad. Well, guess what? Shamel Maxwell is deaf now. He's deaf now because a grown officer with two of his colleagues stood by, asked the medical personnel to step out of the hospital room and beat him down while he was handcuffed. Officer Dwayne Williams, former officer of the Baltimore City Police Department, who also had the audacity to run for office in Baltimore City afterwards to show you how brazen some of these officers are. Talks about themselves in third person to show you how brazen they are. Don't be afraid to speak up and speak out because we're just speaking facts and truth. I'm not making this stuff up. This isn't fantasy. It could happen to you and it does happen to your brothers and sisters. That's what we can do different.
That's right. Now, in terms of John Q. Citizen, what should we do? What should John Q. Citizen do in order to prevent some of these bad experiences? And as taxpayers, who should we be yelling at that we need police reform now? And I know the answer to it, but I'm gonna let you answer that question. Who should we be beating down their doors to talk to prevent some of these things that we've dealt with as attorneys from occurring again?
You know, when it comes to John Q. Citizen, because we just spoke about the reality of reporting police misconduct. Number one, you really do have to start with the reporting. You do. Even if you are not the quote direct victim, if it's your brother, it's your uncle, it's your sister, it's your mother, you really do have to get the ball rolling. That's really step number one. And even if you choose not to give a formal statement afterwards, and you hire a victim's rights attorney or you hire a civil rights attorney, you have to bring it to light. That's number one. Number two is you really do have to deal with these chiefs of the police or these sergeants or lieutenants. Every officer has, quote, a line when it comes to hierarchy. And if you don't say something and hold these members, because in many departments, the higher up you go, the more autonomy the officer has or the sworn member of the department has. You really do have to hold them accountable also. Now, when it comes to who actually puts in place the commissioner or the chief of police, we've got to hold that person accountable.
That's the mayor.
If it is your mayor,
county executives.
If it's the county exec, if it is the mayor, if it is your county exec, if it is the mayor with the city council or the county council, you have got to be vigilant and you have to be vocal. And let me say this, no different than any other election or any other choice that you make, an important decision in your own life. If you don't have the information, you go to someone that does. So if you don't know what's happening in these police departments, talk to a civil rights lawyer, show up in court, find out what's going on. These internal affairs, these board hearings, that's open to the public. Show up, go to the police department, go to headquarters and sit there. These officers have all kinds of support to justify their bad behavior.
You should see them in Annapolis when they're trying to defeat a bill that's trying to bring reform to the department. You should see them in Annapolis. You're absolutely right. But what I'm hearing is that there's a two-pronged approach. There used to be a time we could just go straight legal, but now we got to go legal and political. We have to not only deal with the situation in the courtroom, we also have to deal with the policy issues behind the courtroom proceedings. And so that means that we have to speak to our elected officials. And this is something that Jeff is really getting a hold of. He's real good with this. He's getting a hold of these elected officials, making them do their jobs, making them work for you. You vote for them. You don't work for them. They work for you. If you have a problem or a concern in your community and it's something that they can handle, if they can create some new bill or some new law to help you make your quality of life even better for your community, for your children, for your family, you need to speak to them. put them on speed dial, because they're not there for just window dressing. They're not voted each year or every other year or however often they do it just to get a coronation. They have to do work. They have to work for you, and you want to hear from them after they leave Annapolis. Tell me what you did in the area of police reform, where there's definitely there's a need for a lot of work to be done. Tell me what you voted on. Tell me how you're going to make our policing practices better in our state. And that's one of the things that we need to reach out to them about. The lawyers.
So is that all elected? Are we talking about the sheriff, or are we talking about the sheriff on up? Or where do you start with that as Joe?
Wherever you want to. You can start with your sheriff. You can start with your chief of police, but he's not elected. He's appointed. You can start with your sheriff, who was elected. And what I would like to see you do, go to your county council person, go to your delegate in your area, go to your senator. All those folks work for you. You don't work for them. You're not there at their pleasure. They're there at your pleasure. Yes. Call on these folks. Make them do some freaking work.
And why wouldn't they do that already? Like they live in a society just like we do. So why wouldn't they do that?
Some of them do, but they don't know. They don't know the anecdotal experiences that you have. They don't know. Yeah. They may know that this is a problem that needs to be rectified, but they need support too. So sometimes they may need you to come to Annapolis and share your story with a judicial committee or some type of committee, so they can understand why this particular piece of legislation is important. Police reform is important, especially to our people. This is an election year, and this is actually the time where they're kind of vulnerable and really ready to listen to you.
They'll tell you whatever you want. They'll tell you whatever they'll say.
Well, you know,
tell them what you want them to know, and you tell them, like, look, if you don't do it, then there's going to be some accountability, and you make it so. And social media, you don't even have to leave your house to really blast somebody on social media.
I was going to say, Jay, you know, what is also, I believe, effective is tell your story, because it is true. I think a lot of elected officials get away with the sound bites because they truly don't know your story from A to Z. They really don't know. They really don't know how your family has been affected by being ignored by the state's attorney's office, for example, when they're a victim of crime and the actual assailant is a police officer. You really don't know. A lot of people don't know, but I also sit on the board of directors for the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. So despite being a criminal defense attorney and a civil rights attorney, one of my concerns is making sure we all acknowledge that when you are a victim of crime and the perpetrator is a police officer, you're still a victim of crime, despite many state's attorneys deciding not to prosecute. So the reality is, when you tell your individual story, not only do you compel the elected official to take it, digest it, and respond to it. Ask flat out, what would I do? What should I do? Or what would you do in my situation? If your 14-year-old child at the hospital was chained to a gurney and punched in the head so many times he is now deaf, what do you do? Are you going to pay my bills? Should the officer pay my bills? Are you going to get my mental health services together? Are you going to get me a counselor? Are you going to let my family understand how to re-socialize? Are you going to help this kid in school? Are you going to help take this officer off the street? So, ma'am, what would you do? Ask the elected officials flat out. This is a real concrete example. And I think when you bring these stories to life and to the public, it compels an elected official to respond. And if they don't respond, then they got some real problems. And you can certainly leave that next part up to us, because we will address them in a different venue.
And I will say that our elected officials, and maybe I'm just talking from my own experience because I happen to be a lawyer, but they are responsive, at least to me. And I don't know what that means. If you have a concern, bring it to me. I'll take it to them, or you can go directly to them. I don't know what that means. And I don't know why they're responsive to me, but they will listen to me. I do have the ear of many. But the bottom line is this: we're paying out a lot of money. Taxpayers are paying out a lot of money. They're getting nothing in return except the retention of bad officers. And at this point in time, after the publication of Keith Alexander's article, we need to be very vigilant about these bad officers being retained by our local police departments or transferring to another local police department so they can continue that same line of misconduct that they engaged in when they were over here. We need to get rid of these officers. and knock down all these barriers that they have in place to sustain their way of living and their way of doing business in our community. So that's one of the things we need to work harder on. That's what I think. So Jason, you've been quiet back there. What's up, bro? You reading comments?
Got Jason on mute.
Yeah, pretty much like the comments, you need to go to them in groups though, or they will ignore you most times. There's another one that says the officers should pay 97% and the department pay the rest.
Well, reimburse, because these victims need to be paid immediately for what they've been through. So reimburse the cities. I think they should at least have to pay a deductible, like pay 10, 20,000.
Either that or buy insurance, even though they may not be insured. But there's got to be some. I mean, the level of impunity here is really no. I mean, they keep their job, they keep their pension, they're not paying the penalties. I mean, so there's really no, other than I got into a physical altercation. There's really nothing to it.
Because you have to also understand that many of these officers don't even live in the communities that they police. They go there and they kick ass and wash their hands of it and go back to wherever they live in Pennsylvania, somewhere northern Maryland, or wherever they live. And look, they're still out on the street. They leave the taxpayers to pay for whatever boo-boos that they've made, and they keep on trucking like it's nothing to them. They laugh about it. But
it is nothing to them. They don't have to. They don't have any. There's no benefit to them for that.
Even though it's an extreme case, there was a comedian, or there was a personality. That's a better way of putting it. I don't want to put that under a comedian, who said that if more Black families got insurance policies where the insurance company would have to pay out, that we would see misconduct with officers decrease because of the fact that the insurance companies don't want to pay Black people.
Well, yeah, well, sure.
Yeah. I don't know if that would help, but every little bit helps in this particular case, because at some point, at least the insurance companies will put pressure on the police departments, because they're getting sick and tired of paying out these premiums. But it's got to come from somewhere.
The department should take out insurance on the officers, because then in that case,
you're right.
If it was just like there's a law to have insurance for driving a car, you need to have insurance to be a police officer, and they create bills and laws for that. If the department has to take out that insurance and pay that premium every month.
But you would have to change the law enforcement Bill of Rights, because I think that's a part of it. So like
they repealed the law enforcement Bill of Rights, so that no longer exists, thank goodness.
At least in the state of Maryland.
Latoya, Francis Williams, myself, and good senators, Jill Carter, and a host of others, the law enforcement officers Bill of Rights has been repealed.
So I mean, the thing is that if they're forced to maintain a license, or they're forced to maintain a policy, like if they have to have, just like you as your individual business, you have to have liability insurance. They need to have liability insurance and that policy. And then, if they have, like, I go back to that one officer in his article that had like 143. Like if he had his own insurance policy that had to pay for that, he would be uninsurable, and he would not be allowed to be an officer.
Right.
But I mean, you gotta pass the laws for that.
He's working off the city's insurance policies.
Pretty much.
And that's why I think a registry is so important. You have a sex offender registry, you have gun offender registry. Why not have bad police officer registry? It's very simple. Everybody just develop a website, and all those officers who've had these complaints of excessive force, facts sustained of excessive force, or settlements. And I think settlements are, because the city is just not in the business of giving money away. They don't give money away to meritless cases. They defend meritless cases. When the case has merit, that's when it settles. When the case is indefensible, that's when it settles. When the case is going to cost the city more money, or the county more money than it would take to actually come to an agreement with the attorneys and the parties involved, that's when it settles. But they don't just give away. It's not free money. It's not a lottery like they try to mention in the article.
But like you say, they can fall in between the language of the settlement, because one, you just said that the settlement, sometimes they're not going to court, so there's really no hard record of it, right? I mean, you're saying that it gets documented in some fashion, But like you said, there's no claim that's being filed at the advice of counsel. So because you worry about something else that's going to happen later on, they get out here, they have these settlements, they got NDAs, which when people hear NDA, they just accept it for the fact that it is a non-disclosure agreement and you can't talk about it. Nobody really reads an NDA, but then you go through is until somebody challenges it and says, well, this NDA doesn't even make sense. It says you can't talk about it for the next 100 years. And that's something that, can't really be enforced. So it's like, nobody knows this stuff. I mean, there's got to be a lot more education on the part of the people who are in these situations. And then, not to mention that it's going to be hindsight. It's going to be after the fact. After you already got your tail with you in the throes of this thing, that you start talking about all this other stuff, and it's like, I don't know how you get this information out in front of people so that they can have it if they happen to find themselves into that situation, or they just keep you two on speed dial and just call it a day.
Well, it takes courage. It takes courage, no doubt. And you have to be someone who's willing to stand up for your rights. Those who are willing to accept, this bad treatment are never going to really receive the justice that they deserve unless they do contact a Latoya Francis Williams or a J. Wendell Gordon. But we cannot be afraid to speak about the horrors and the terrors that we experience by way of police, just as we speak about the horrors and terrors that we experience by way of crime in our city or crime in our counties. All of this works hand in hand. And so I just feel like, if you got to talk about it. You can't be afraid to talk about it, litigate about it, find the attorney who can move the case forward. Latoya?
Yeah, and when we say talk about it, we mean in a formal and an informal setting. In other words, this is a platform. I think when we normalize literally having the community come together and call out these officers, no different than we call out bad teachers, no different than we call out bad doctors and bad lawyers. Talking about it is not just therapeutic, but talking about it is kind of like a public service announcement. I had a run-in with Officer Williams, right? And Officer Williams patrols Southeast District. If you're getting 4 and 5 and 6, or sadly in the reverse, everyone knows Officer Williams. Oh, we know how he is. When you get those types of conversations, even the informal conversations, it needs to be brought, be it through counsel, be it through a public official, to the police department. And as I was saying before, not to repeat myself, we cannot allow the police departments off the hook by saying, well, you didn't file a formal complaint. Baltimore County is very big on that. If you don't file a formal complaint in Baltimore County, Maryland, the police department tends to treat the issue as if it's a non-issue. They literally will not, quote, investigate internally the officer's bad behavior if no formal complaint was filed. Why is that acceptable to anybody? Why is that the case in any jurisdiction? The reality is when you have a bad doctor, the doctor isn't dealt with only if somebody dies, or only if a lawsuit is filed, or only if the medical board, strips the doctor of his or her license. Why are we waiting for the formal ducks to fall in a row before we address these officers?
Especially when you have the conduct on videotape and it goes
exactly.
So you're telling me that you know about this videotape?
That's my point.
Been on the news, it's been on Fox 45, been on WTTG, Fox 5, whatever it is, and you see it, but you're still not going to investigate it because you never received a formal
complaint. Right. And again, I'm not grouping all, quote, bad officers the same, but it seems that all bad officers seem to fall into this category. A lot of them are womenizers. A lot of them are husband beaters. A lot of them are victims or causing victims of domestic violence. I use Kendra Diggs, one of our older cases, where Kendra Diggs was shot in the head by Officer Smith. Now, Kendra Diggs was a victim of domestic violence. When the officers responded to her house, they tried to, quote, debrief her, to convince her not to report it to a superior. But while she was standing outside of her house being debriefed by Officer Smith's colleagues, Officer Smith pointed his gun out the window and shot her in the head twice, right? So the reality is we see these officers and they display this behavior in other forms or fashions. If you are dating a cop that abuses you emotionally, sexually, and physically, report him or her. Don't just report it to the police department. And I know the police departments want to call it personnel. Well, we've moved beyond that. This is not just a personnel record issue. Again, a lot of these officers behave the way that they behave on the street because they behave the way they behave at home. A lot of them are drunks. A lot of them abuse drugs. A lot of them steroids. And we're speaking from experience. We're not just grouping them and saying we're throwing these wild accusations out. This is what we are finding in doing depositions and taking discovery and sitting down in the formal process. But the reality is these departments know these things about the officers. One of the issues with police reform is the officers really do need to have mental health treatment. If an officer is involved in a police-involved shooting, they should not be back at work the next day. Whether you believe they were wrong or right, they should not be back at work the next week. They too need trauma-informed care. We don't want sick cops policing our communities. I don't want them in my neighborhood.
Boom.
So, the reality is, let's talk about it. But the departments have to be held accountable for what they know, despite us not forcing their hand, despite us not forcing them to the formal table. They know better. They work amongst these officers.
Then maybe we can reduce this billion-dollar industry.
Absolutely.
Billions of dollars in payouts, billions in dollars spent to defend these officers, and billions of dollars of taxpayer money going to individuals that they would much rather not have the money and just go on and live their lives peacefully without the trauma that's been caused by these police. Ladies and gentlemen, this is
real quick, there's a question before we go, and I thought it was a pretty good question. And they asked, is there a cap on settlement payments by officers?
So do you mind if I take it?
Go ahead, you can take it.
Yeah, so it depends on the state you live in and the area that you live in. Like, for example, in the state of Maryland, there is what we call a damages cap, meaning the amount of money you can force the local government to pay on behalf of the officer. When it comes to filing civil suits and you have physical injuries, medical bills, and those types of things, and then you have non-economic damages, there is a cap on non-economic damages. So the short answer is yes, there's a cap at different levels. There's a cap on how much you can collect on non-economic damages, and then there's a cap on how much you can compel the local government to pay out on behalf of their wronged officer, meaning the officer that did the wrong. And in terms of settling, you can settle a suit for as much as your heart contends, if in fact the local department or the local agency or the entity believes that it is, quote, fair and equitable. So
non-economic damages are pain and suffering.
Like pain and suffering,
mental,
humiliation,
emotional distress, that type of thing. Economic damages are those damages that you can account for dollar for dollar, medical expenses, therapy expenses, and things of that nature. But look,
and let me just a real quick caveat. That is at the state court level. At the federal level, there is a different analysis that goes into place. There is no damages cap at the federal level. Right. Sorry.
No, that's great. Look, Latoya, thank you. You're always welcome on this show, especially when we talk about these issues. Keith Alexander, again, he's been with us. He stayed with us for 30 minutes. That's what he promised. That's what he delivered. 30 minutes. He's the author of an article that was published in the Washington Post on March 9th that discusses the cost of police misconduct cases. So we were very privileged to have him here this evening. My name is Jay Wendell Gordon. I'm the Warrior Lawyer. We'll be right back at you next week with another episode of In Brotherly Love. Look, Jeff, Jason, y'all take it away. I'm gonna get me something to eat, man. This Hennessy is rocking me right now.
Hey, bro, look, man,
we was tracking.
Hey, I'm gonna tell you, I've been laughing at you silently all night because number one, you're a wordsmith, and then you were just there. We can tell you was juice, bro.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been another exciting episode of In Brotherly Love. Hey, we had to speak up. We had to say something. I know it's crazy out here, and I know attorneys will tell you to speak up and say something, but they're not the ones getting punched in the head. So it's really something. We really gotta trust them. Keep them on speed dial. Keep attorney Latoya Francis Williams on speed dial. Keep my brother Jay Wendell, the Warrior Lord Gordon, on speed dial. Yo, get him in your corner. You're gonna need him. This is Jeff Gordon. This is In Brotherly Love. We'll be right back at you next week.
Man, I don't have to add too much to that, man. Y'all know what it is. I'm gonna give Jay Wendell an opportunity to get on off of here so he can go get some water and food in his system.
We're gonna
but
give Latoya the last word.
Yep, there you go. Going ahead, Miss.
I thank you all for having me and giving us all this platform. HBCU raised, right? HBCU.
Where'd you go? Where you go?
Yeah,
Where you go? You gotta
one.
claim it. You can't just say something. You gotta claim it.
Howard,
Claim your
Howard and
set.
Morgan.
Oh.
Man, you went to.
Oh.
I went to Howard and
You
Morgan.
get right with the Morgan, but
Oh, you went to Howard. Okay, there you go. There you go. There you go.
I hope that was Howard County. Shit.
Nah, she went
I
to the
hope that
real
was Howard
HU.
County.
Not
Hey,
That was
13th.
that was the real HU.
She didn't go to 13th grade. You know what I'm saying? She didn't go to HD Woodson High.
Hey, look, she went to the 13th grade, and then Howard was like, "Come on, see us."
Nah, we was like, we need to rescue you.
Y'all was like, "We need the money."
Hold on, Institute. Come on, Institute.
That ain't the money. Yeah, they need the money because all the administrators be putting the money in their own pockets and buying yachts and mansions and stuff.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
They got a whole bunch of embezzlement going on down there at Howard University.
Hey, you got to be able to prove it. That's defamatory there, homeboy.
Alleged.
Well, allegedly.
That's right.
Hey, y'all have a good one, man. Be safe out there. Continue to wear y'all mask. I don't care what nobody say. If you notice, since you've been wearing your mask, people ain't got the cold and the flu. So just keep that thing on just a little bit longer. Holla at y'all in brotherly love. Love you guys. Peace.
Peace.